We seem to have regressed 150 years to a Dickensian era of diseases as new NHS data discovered by LBC show malnutrition, rickets and scurvy soaring during Rishi Sunak's premiership. Figures obtained from 84 NHS trusts show tens of thousands of diagnoses of malnutrition, rickets and scurvy, and the true figure may be 3 times higher than previous estimates as they encompass secondary diagnoses. Here's Keir Starmer reacting to the news this morning.
21st century Britain, this is 2024, and we're talking about an increased number of children with malnutrition. Of course, that's something which a government ought to be ashamed of. And, putting these measures together, we intend to address.
Well, here to discuss this further is Professor Michael Marmot, Professor of Epidemiology at UCL. Michael, very good to see you there. This is a deeply depressing report. I can remember as a small boy in an industrial town seeing men with rickets, elderly men with rickets who'd worked in mills, and being told that was what it was by my father. I never dreamed that it would be back on the streets of Britain today.
We've got a revival of the Victorian notion of destitution. At the end of last year, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation produced a report on destitution. It said 3.8 million people in Britain are in a state of destitution, including 1 million children. And the way they defined destitution is doing without 2 or more of 6 essentials: housing, heat, light, food, appropriate clothing for the conditions, and toiletries. Now those figures come from 2022. In 2022, 3.8 million people, 1 million children, are doing without 2 or more of those 6 basics. That's destitution in modern Britain.
That is absolutely horrific. And for people who don't understand, can I ask you about the specific diseases? Scurvy, which is something that the Royal Navy fought against with limes and lemons back in the 18th century. Just tell us what scurvy is and where it comes from.
Scurvy arises from a shortage of vitamin C. Vitamin C comes from citrus fruits. It is cheaper to feed your child with biscuits than with oranges. The problem is nutritious food, fresh fruit and vegetables, is more expensive than is energy-dense food that's dense with fat and sugar. It's much cheaper per calorie. So the idea that we're starting to suffer the same diseases that in Victorian times people on long ocean voyages suffered because of shortage of citrus fruits is simply horrendous. And it is a remediable problem. I mentioned Joseph Rowntree and the Trussell Trust. They have done a report on essentials, the cost of meeting essentials, including food. And universal credit pays about 70% of the cost of meeting essentials. So if you're on universal credit, if you're on benefits, we guarantee you will get sick because we don't give you enough money to eat healthily, to heat your home or meet the other essentials.
And we were talking about scurvy, which has pretty horrible outcomes. Rickets, as I understand, a bone disease, and again comes from poverty, comes from malnutrition.
From malnutrition and lack of sunlight, vitamin D. Now that ought to be remediable. One thing that's happened, we've cleaned up the air, which is very important. But if you're not getting enough vitamin D from sunshine, then you need it from diet. And that means a rich, varied diet. And once again, a varied diet with fresh fruit, vegetables, meat, fish, and the like is essential. And compounding the problem, the Food Foundation tracks food insecurity. And food insecurity is defined as skipping meals because you can't afford them, not eating enough to satisfy your hunger, or going a whole day without eating, again, because of lack of access or cost. And 22% of households with children are suffering food insecurity. And that means that they won't be eating the nutritious foods to combat those diseases linked to nutritional deficiencies.
And Professor Marmot, this really has been your life's work, tracking the connection between poverty, malnutrition, and bad health outcomes. How did you feel emotionally when you saw this particular report?
It's deeply, deeply depressing. It's grim in the extreme. You remember when the beverage report came out during World War II, it was a bestseller. Beveridge identified what he called 5 giants on the road to reconstruction: want, squalor, idleness, ignorance, and sickness. Now, I think of 4 of those beverage giants, the first 4, as contributing to the 5th. And the first one, want, simply not enough money to meet those basics. And the idea that in 2024, that's where we are. And my way of thinking about it now, looking at the figures, essentially, Britain has become a poor country with a few rich people. And at the very poor end of the distribution, it's worse to be poor in Britain than in most other European countries. Poor people in Britain have a lower income than Slovenia. It really is bad to be poor in Britain. And it's a soluble problem. A soluble problem.
Well, there is something for us to take away tonight and think about very hard. Sir Michael Marmot, thank you so much for talking to me.